Now, the woman that you see on your screen is an indicted war criminal by the International Criminal Court. She doesn't look like a war criminal, but let's look at her. So here's her background. Maria Lvova-Belova is a Russian politician. She's been presidential commissioner for children's rights. What a euphemism. Children's rights since October 2021, when she was appointed to the position by Russian President Vladimir Putin. On 17 March 2023, the International Criminal Court, amidst an ongoing investigation, issued arrest warrants for Putin, two people, Putin and Lvova-Belova. That's where she ranks. She's one of only two Russians that were indicted then. Her charges concern her role in the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Okay, that's who we're talking about. But before we talk about her, let's look at this. Deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia recognized as genocide, says the Council of Europe. This was fairly recently. And the comment here was lack of global outrage is beyond comprehension. I agree. I don't understand. I mean, if your kids were lost in your own city, you'd be pulling your hair out. You wouldn't sleep until you found them. And yet these children are stolen from one country into another. Scott Ritter says, well, because it never happened. The lack of global outrage is beyond comprehension because it never happened. And my reply to that was, it's just evil to deny this because truth matters. Now, Scott's going to double down. Now, this is Scott Ritter, by the way, if you don't know who he is. You literally have zero verifiable data to back up this ridiculous assertion. He goes on in the comments below. Zero verifiable data? I'll show you some of this. He says, evacuations are not deportations. I say again, it never happened. Look, you can redefine a thing, but that doesn't mean the thing didn't actually happen. So you can say that it's not a deportation. It's something else. We'll call it a friendly neighborhood visit, but that doesn't mean it's a friendly neighborhood visit. Okay, somebody found the evidence. Here's the evidence. And if you click on it, and I'll click on it, and we'll show you the interview that she just had. But before I do that, let's do this. Let's start with Melania Trump. This was back in October 11th, 2025, just a few weeks ago. Melania Trump says 8 Ukrainian children abducted to Russia. Abducted. No. I thought that they were just evacuated. No, they were abducted to Russia, have been returned home after secret talks with Moscow. She calls it an ongoing mission to reunite children separated by war. More than 19,000, that number is going to keep coming up, so let's highlight that. 19,000 Ukrainian children have been forcibly taken to Russia since the full-scale invasion began. Okay, and then we see this in the U.S. Congress. It's happening right now. Putin has abducted more than 19,000 Ukrainian children, not by accident, but by design. This is Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. Again, we see that 19,000 number, a deliberate calculated act of T. Today, with Representative Keating, we introduced bipartisan legislation delivering a clear ultimatum. Return these children or face the full weight of a state sponsor of T, you know what the word is here, designation. America will not look away. We will lead. We will hold Putin accountable. Evil will be called by its evil. That's what I said. It's evil. Evil will be called by its name. Okay, so they'll be designated a state sponsor of T. And that's a great thing if that actually takes place and is done, right? That if it goes through Congress and the Senate's looking at something similar to that. I'll talk about that in my 3 big stories later on. Okay, now here's Maria Lvova-Belova. I stole a Mariupol child. This was in United 24. Maria Lvova-Belova, a war criminal with an International Criminal Court arrest warrant to her name, once again confessed to the hideous crime of kidnapping and indoctrinating Ukrainian children. Let's look at the full thing. This is Anton Gerashenko, did the subtitles for this. We'll watch this. In 2023, the Hague Court issued an arrest warrant for you over the abduction of Ukrainian children. Please explain, how credible do their accusations look today, now that the situation has basically been clarified? They don't accept that reasoning. They still continue their mythology that we forcibly take children. Well, okay, so you do forcibly take children if those children were in Ukraine and you transported them and they didn't want to go. That's called forcible deportation. Like that's what it is. It's not just evacuation. Okay, so let's keep going. They don't accept that reasoning, change their identities, re-educate them in Russian patriotism. Let's go back just a little bit. So um, they still continue the mythology that they were forcibly taken children. That's the first part of the clause. And then she says, change their identities, re-educate them in Russian patriotism. Yeah, and that's part of the process. But doesn't your story with Philip contradict that? That, by the way, was one of the reasons the arrest warrant was issued. Why? Because I abducted a child from Mariupol and brought him into my family, which he did. I behaved so provocatively that I even took a Ukrainian child. Like, how could I hate these Ukrainians if I'm taking one into my own family? Because the Russian mentality, it's really interesting. And I've learned this over time. The Russian mentality is that they're not Ukrainian, they're Russian. They just have imbibed this kind of mind virus about this political thing called being Ukrainian, but they're really Russians. So if we can just re-educate them into being Russian again, they're just good Russians. They're not other, they're really us that are turned traitor. So, and the other ones that have not been able to eliminate that mind virus, well, you have to kill them off. So that's the way that the Russians tend to think about things. Okay, let's keep going. They don't accept that reasoning, that still continue that mythology that they were forcibly taken to children. Again, I'm going back over that same thing. Change their identities, re-educate them in Russian patriotism. Okay, and then she's going to go on and say this, but doesn't that story, or he's going to ask, but doesn't your story with Philip change that? That, by the way, is the reason that the arrest warrant was issued. Why? Because I abducted a child from Mariupol and brought him into my family. I behaved so provocatively that I even took a Ukrainian child. Of course, Philip made our family situation more complicated. He arrived from Mariupol in a very difficult situation, suffering from post-traumatic stress after the bombings. Well, who started the bombings? Like, you did the bombings, and then you're saying, well, he had all this PTSD. Well, there's a reason. You didn't have to do the bombings to begin with. Plus, he had a particular attitude toward Russia that what do you mean by a particular attitude? Well, the negative sentiment that had been cultivated in Mariupol schools children over the long period, he was subject to the same program as everyone else. That's why he always told you, I love you, but you're my mother, but everything else, Moscow, Russia, everything annoys me. I don't want any of it. Okay, let's talk about the negative attitude that he had. Why would he have a negative attitude, do you think? Okay, so this is from the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, and this is polling. And I want you to see something. The lineup here is good, and then it drops precipitously, and then the line down here is bad, and then it raises precipitously. This is dynamics of good and bad attitude of the population of Ukraine to Russia. Okay, so what happened where this good attitude toward Russia, where 80% of the population or more had a good attitude until, what's this date here where it starts to drop? Hey, it looks like it's about 2014. When Russia invaded Ukraine. Okay, yeah, it's because of American-sponsored coup of, Ukraine. That's what the Russians will say. It's not that. The Maidan protests were there. That's true. But then Russia invaded Ukraine. And then there's another incident here. And then it stays kind of low. And then the attitude starts to tick back up. 17, 18, 19, 20. 2020, and then it drops back down precipitously about when? When does it start to really level off? About February 2021, 2022, it really starts to drop about here just as the invasion's about to begin, right? So why is that attitude there? What did Russia do just before this? This is what I do with my children. When one of my children comes to me and says, Dad, she hit me, or he hit me, or whatever it was. Oh, what happened just before that? Like, what was the precipitating? What did you do right? Was there an interaction that was causing it? Okay, let's go back to this. Okay, that's why he always says, I love you, Mommy, but I hate Russia. He had constant outbursts, and we spent a lot of nights talking with him. So he didn't want to live in Russia? He didn't want to live in Russia, yes. Okay, if he didn't want to live in Russia, and he's there against his will because you deported him there, that's exactly what this is. Okay. How did you deal with it? Well, there was a turning point. I remember it well because he was constantly visiting pro-Ukrainian sites and reading propaganda. And he's filling his brain with his propaganda. Already while in Moscow, of course, while he was in my family, sitting on the couch and watching. And when I saw it, I told him, listen, you're already in Russia. You need to change your attitude somehow. Well, of course, just tell him to change your attitude and magically it happens. Not wishing that he was with his actual family, who was or other relatives, even if let's say his mom and dad were no longer with us, with other relatives or wherever. Okay, so what exactly was he saying? I don't want to live in Russia. I want to live in Ukraine. I don't want to live in Russia because I love Ukraine. That's what he was saying. He was deported, Scott Ritter. You're listening. He was deported. He doesn't want to live there. It's against his will. This is the very definition. You can call it an evacuation, but that's not what it was. He sang songs in Ukrainian all the time. Gradually, his mindset began to change toward reality, moving away from the propaganda. It's actually moving toward propaganda. That's what it is, toward Russian propaganda, as they're trying to re-indoctrinate him into being a good little Russian. Right. So now he doesn't want to go back to Ukraine? No. He sometimes visits Mariupol every 6 months or so. Once a year, he says, no, I'm going home. Okay. So look, that's what this was. This was a great level of evil. Now, while we're at this, if you think that deporting children or hitting or hurting children is not important, even the Russians acknowledge this. Foreign Ministry of Russia saying this just a week ago, Kyiv neo-Nazi regime continues to tee Russian civilians. In 1 week, there were 104 casualties with 21 dead and 83 wounded. Now, Ukraine doesn't spend its time going after civilians, so this may be electronically warfare, knockdown drones, or that sort of thing, including 6 children. So when they say this, including 6 children, it's that they know that children ought to be protected, right? Otherwise you wouldn't add that clause. It doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah, it's C.S. Lewis talked about, give me a bit of your orange, I gave you a bit of mine. You wouldn't have that other clause of I gave you a bit of mine unless you knew that we should be trading fairly with each other, right? It's that same kind of thing. All right. But they don't acknowledge this kind of thing. Here's a woman that sits at the grave of her 8-year-old grandson, Ivan. She also lost both of her children and her husband in a Russian strike. This is what Russia's doing to Ukraine all the time. When you think about it, and now this is this morning, when you think it couldn't get any worse, Russia hit Kharkiv kindergarten full of children with 3 Shaheds. This was an intentional strike, 3 Shahed drones. Either they're totally incompetent, which they say that they're not, or they're targeting a kindergarten. That was this morning. Okay. Well, I'll leave you with this last little bit. And I showed you this about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. My motivation is simple but powerful. A wife waiting at home and belief in a free, strong Ukraine where our children won't have to take up arms for the right to live, says a senior operator of the 8th Special Forces Regiment. It's a strong motivation. Yeah. All right. Tell me what you thought about what you saw here. Put it in the comments below. I try to read as much as I possibly can. Shout out to Kyle McGregor, an undergraduate YouTube member. Thank you all for your time and for being willing to watch this and think through this with me. And thank you more than anything for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.